Suicide has always been a topic of contention to many people, but in the recent years it has evolved into the medical field in the form of physician-assisted suicide, or PAS for simplicity's sake. So PAS is when a patient who is diagnosed as terminally ill requests upon a doctor to prescribe drugs that the patient will take and terminate his or her life. And I ultimately take the stance that PAS provides the patient with the local autonomy they have a right to. In other words, it provides them with a choice they have a right to exercise. To aid my stance, I will use the following points. Number one, that PAS provides the patient with the option to a painless death. Number two, that PAS has a positive economic effect onto the patient and his surviving kin. And number three, that the imminent loss of the patient's autonomy also allows them to consider PAS as an option. In my first claim, I state that PAS allows a patient option to a painless death. So the death of these patients is imminent. They're terminal, and it could be a long and painful process. And in the court case Baco v. Quill, the United States Supreme Court states that the right of a competent, terminally ill patient to avoid excruciating pain and embrace a timely and dignified death is a right central to personal autonomy and body integrity, and it's a right that the court safeguards. So even though this case in particular doesn't defend PAS, it ultimately sets a precedent that the court will back up a person's desire to not have a painful death. In my second claim, I state that PAS can have a positive economic effect on the patient and their surviving kin. We all know that medical costs are very expensive, and as harsh as it may sound, these costs just keep on rising until the person lives out his or her final days. Slate Magazine estimates that the cost for PAS as a process was roughly around $1,000, and when compared to the statistics given from the National Hospice Organization, where they say that 35.5% of patients stay in a hospice institution for 7 or less days, meaning that over 2/3 of the patients admitted to institutions like that will stay more than 7 days, up to several months. So there is a definite economic advantage to, or if there's a financial concern by the patient. In my last claim, I say that the imminent loss of autonomy leads the patient to consider PAS. To not be able to move, to have to rely on other people is something that the patients will offer concern to, and if we take the case study of Oregon, which is the first state that adopted a PAS principle of law, and it was put into vote in 1994, and it passed by a very small margin of 51 pro, 49 against. And in the first year that this was enacted into the state, in 1998, there was an extensive report done by the Oregon Department of Human Resources and the Oregon Health Division, and where they found that 5 of every 10 deaths in the state in that year were through PAS. But ultimately, through testimonials from patients, they came to the conclusion that their primary concern of anyone who considered PAS was to avoid that loss of integrity, the loss of bodily functions. So in the end, whether a patient is choosing to go through the process of terminating one's life, whether it's because of concerns of pain, whether it's to avoid a financial burden after they pass, or to never see that day when they lose their autonomy, where they lose their independence. I ultimately believe that the person has a right to do that. They have a right to have that option available to them. So physician-assisted suicide provides the patients with that local autonomy they have a right to exercise. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the propositions identified, it's kind of phrased in a sort of tricky way because it basically argues that a particular right exists or that a value is kind of ensconced in the existing system. So technically it's a claim of fact as it's phrased, but you are dancing around a value argument in several spots here, and I think that represents some potential issues, and it also gives the respondent, I think, a little bit of leeway in the kinds of arguments that they might choose to make in response. On the argument about painless death, there's basically an assertion here that deaths have to be painful. There's no explanation about why they have to be painful. We've only got a hypothetical in the situation. There's no evidence that people, in fact, suffer painful deaths, except that there's this assumption that it's painful. I think the idea that people could be treated for their pain is not discussed here. The inaccuracies or the inability of our pain medications to work, that's not discussed. So the first response that anybody might say here is treat people for their pain and all of the reason for your argument disappears. And you don't have anything built in to respond to that particular point. I think that's problematic. On the economic argument, I think that you basically mentioned that there's going to be a difference between the two costs, and I think that that's understandable if you're spending time. If it costs you $1,000 to get a medication and take it and die, versus if you have to spend some time being cared for in an institution or some other version of a hospice, that there's going to be a difference in price. The question then becomes: how significant is that difference in price? And I think, again, from the opponent's point of view, there's going to be an argument that says that difference in price is one of the reasons that we want to be very careful about these sorts of laws, because now the decision might be made not on the basis of somebody's pain and suffering or their desire for autonomy, but the desire to reduce the economic effect on somebody. I can just see all the grandkids urging Grandpa to go ahead and snuff himself because, if you use all your money, then we won't have anything left, and that's not fair, Grandpa. I'd like to buy, I don't know. And I'm sure the insurance companies would be happy about this if they don't have to pay to sustain somebody at the end of their life, and say, oh, it's $1,000 to snuff yourself versus $30,000 to take care of you in the last 6 months of your life. Here's a $1,000 check. Let's get it done. And as a cost-saving measure, I'm not exactly sure that people are going to think that that's a good thing. So I think you have to be a little bit careful about those kinds of arguments. The Oregon data, I heard you say something that just struck me as odd, and it's not a direct quote, and this is one of the reasons that I think is problematic with a lot of the evidence that everybody's been using in their arguments, is that sometimes people are paraphrasing or summarizing something that they think they've read, and that's not what it says. Because it basically, what you said is that half of all deaths in Oregon were related to the death with dignity law, and I'm going, that makes that can't possibly be right. I'm sure that there is a 5 out of 10 deaths issue there in your evidence, but I don't think you've read the evidence correctly. There's something about the way it's phrased that is a little bit different. And that's why it's important for you guys to use direct quotes instead of paraphrasing and summarizing. All right, thank you.